Hey troops, this is Jeff Evely, Ops Sergeant-Major for Veterans for Freedom. Back with you now with some of the greatest intelligence and analysis that we have on offer here in Canada. We have a few stories from the INSUM here for you today that we thought we wanted to bring up. We see a couple of signs that things might be turning in the right direction, and also a few others that kind of add to the irony of what we're having to deal with at this moment in time. I have back with me here Tom Quiggan, our intelligence officer for Veterans for Freedom. Tom, thanks for coming on with us again today.
Cheers, Jeff. Always a pleasure.
All right. And so the first story here is kind of the hot one for today, I think, is what's going on with Health Canada and these medals.
Yeah, this one is, if you're looking for an indicator and warning in intelligence language that something's not quite right over at Health Canada, here's something that's both vaguely amusing, but it's also kind of terrifying at the same time. Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, has decided they're going to give a hero medallion to 5,000 of their employees. And guess how many employees they have? Well, it's 5,000. So everybody at Health Canada is getting a hero medallion for being such a great person during the pandemic. So anyway, you kind of look at it and go, really, all 5,000 of them are heroes? Nobody did a little better than the other person, anything like that? So the first thing that kind of jumps out at me as someone who worked for the civil service for a while is to say, this is another sort of case of basically rewarding failure and covering up failure. In other words, if there's a real problem in one department of the civil service and they've really messed something up, one way you sort of put a cover on that is to actually hand out hero awards to everybody for having done such a wonderful job. And it also smacks of the current ideology in the public sector, which is the same thing we're seeing in kids' sports these days. You get a participation trophy for just showing up. So if you go to a soccer game these days, doesn't matter whether you score a goal or not, doesn't matter whether you win or not, doesn't matter if you even kick the ball in the right direction on the field. What's important is you participated and that you feel good about yourself. So this is that kind of feel-goodism kind of stuff. It's about making everybody feel good. But let's do kind of a really quick review of Public Health Canada, the Public Health Agency of Canada. How did they do at the start of the pandemic? And here's kind of the things that kind of get me going. One of the first things that came out of Dr. Theresa Tam, the head of this thing, was she said, well, masks aren't really all that important. And, we should really save them for the doctors and the frontline workers that really need them. And you as a person don't really need them. And then, of course, a few months later, it's like, well, yeah, I guess you should wear them. And now it's like, you still have to wear your stupid mask on an airplane because, oh my God, if you don't wear a mask on an airplane, everybody in the airplane is going to die of COVID. So we went from don't have to do it to kind of sort of should and then absolute must. And which one's right? I mean, there's, a lot of scientific evidence coming out saying masks are not really helping all that much, but they could, in fact, be hurting. Then there was kind of the larger discussion, remember about where did this virus come from? Did it jump from some bat in some cave in China somewhere to some poor soul that was working in a food market who then transmitted it to his buddy to, then everybody's got it? Is that the story? Or was this thing cooked up in a lab somewhere in Wuhan, China, and it leaked out of the lab or was sent out of the lab and it got everybody? So, of course, the initial response to that was, oh, of course, it's a totally natural event. And if you say anything different than that, it's because you're racist. So now, of course, we've got the head of the Lancet, one of the world's 2 leading medical journals, saying, yeah, I think it's probably cooked up in a lab. We need better investigation. And we've been stopped from investigating. But here's the fun one to me. And this, to me, is just pure racism. And how the Public Health Canada gets away with this kind of racist stuff is amazing. When it first became apparent that Wuhan, China was ground zero, a lot of folks said, well, maybe folks from Wuhan shouldn't be allowed to travel to Canada a lot. Maybe we should put in some sort of border controls that people that travel to and from Wuhan, China should be identified and blocked. And of course, Public Health of Canada says that's because you're racist. Border controls are racist. And if you support border controls, that's because you're racist. So that's kind of the racist theory of pandemic. Anything you say against public health is racist. Now, zip ahead a year and a half or so, and there was an outbreak in South Africa. And for a while there, it was kind of thought this new outbreak in Africa might be kind of special or different because it was Omicron and it was going to be super powerful. What did Public Health Canada say? We need to block flights coming in from Africa. And I just kind of thought, that's racist. But here's the funny part. Dr. Tam is from China herself, and she says if you block Chinese people, that's because you're racist. But blocking Black people from Africa is somehow not only okay, but in fact required. So I just it struck me like, oh my God, talk about full-on racism on display.
Mhm.
When Public Health Canada does it, it's okay. Now, the other thing, of course, is the failure of public health, which isn't getting broadcast too much. The travel mandates. Oh, you have to be double boosted or double vaccinated or whatever to travel on a plane or a train, and you need the ArriveCan app, and you can't do this and you can't do that. Well, when Transport Canada kind of had a gun put to their head in court and said, where was the science behind this? Where did the recommendations come from? Well, one of the things they did was contacted Public Health Canada and said, what science do we have to support the travel mandates? And Public Health provided them, yeah, nothing. Not a shred, not a zip, zero, bugger all, not a sausage, nothing. So here's Public Health spending a whole bunch of taxpayers' money to give everybody a hero medallion for a department which, quite frankly, messed up the entire pandemic process. So anyway, that's just one of those indicators and warnings as well about what bad shape the civil service is in. It's funny, it's laughable, but it's terrifying because it's so serious at the same time, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, the kinds of consequences that the rest of us are having to live through for their mismanagement, ineptitudes, and corruption, they're orders of magnitude beyond anything that can even be assessed in this moment. I mean, what are we going to see as the kind of health fallouts for all of this stuff down the line? And yeah, you covered a lot of ground there, Tom. Plenty to absorb. Dr. Tam, I remember, she had a conflict of interest too, didn't she? I've always kind of wondered a little bit about her. I know she's, you said she's from China. I believe she's from Hong Kong originally, but in her bio, like they don't give a birth date for her. And I always wondered why that might be. And I see that she's part of the WHO is making decisions on, she's on the board that, I think at one point voted not to go public with the fact that the Chinese were covering up the outbreak in Wuhan, China. So it's all been very shady from the start.
Yeah, there's a very clear conflict of interest, if you just pointed out. If you're working for Canada, you should be working in the interests of Canada. Great. Now, I also think, if you're going to go work for the UN or the World Health Organization or the IMF or the World Bank or whatever those things, okay, maybe that's what you want to do. You're going to work and advocate on their behalf. Maybe that's okay as well. But I am absolutely stunned at the idea that she can work for Public Health Canada and be the head of that, and also sit on the board of the World Health Organization, which has interests which are not at the heart of Canada. She's compromised. So if she goes this way, she's compromised. If she goes that way, she's compromised. Shouldn't be allowed. Same thing we've seen with Christy Freeland, who sits on the board of advisors of the World Economic Forum. Yep. If they want to go participate in that thing and they're open about it, I don't like it, but okay, if they're going to do it, fine. But you can't be a minister of the Crown working for the advocacy of Canada, while at the same time working for the World Economic Forum, which advocates getting rid of our sovereignty. So yeah, Dr. Tam's in that same bind, and whether she's to blame, whether Trudeau's to blame, whether the bureaucracy is to blame, I don't know. But she's in a compromised position. Consequently, anything she says has to be regarded with extraordinary distrust, Jeff.
Yeah, and who could really blame anyone who distrusts her? I find I remember early in the pandemic, she actually said that no, they didn't advise that we should be wearing masks. And it was stated rather clumsily, in fact, so clumsily that I was suspicious of the advice, and I had to do a little bit of research myself to really digest it. And what I found actually was that even at that time, there was a massive study, double blind and the whole shebang, that was published out of South Korea, early on in the pandemic, and they had mask mandates there. And what they found was that while the thing is, it's indeterminate. Like, they'll say that there is some benefit, but the fact of the matter is that the confidence intervals are so wide that the amount of benefit doesn't even outweigh the risk of other infectious, like respiratory infections and things like that. So the conclusion that they were drawing is that it was not advisable, especially because of all the other pathogens that might come along, like sticking to the mask and stuff like that, bacteria and whatnot. So then I was shocked to see when they turned around and said in the summer that we should be wearing the masks. And that was kind of when things really kind of went south in my mind. And that was when I was sure that we were headed down the wrong path and that there was more than meets the eye to this thing, because I knew what the data said on this. And she completely did a flip-flop. My theory is that they just told us to put on the mask so we'd stop buying all the toilet paper. What do you think?
I think it's like many things, it has more to do with social control. It has more to do with narrative control. And certainly within government, more often than not, when faced with a quandary and a difficult situation, it's not really 100% clear what to do. It's, well, we have to do something. We have to look like we're doing something. And masks are easy and you can see it. It's something everybody can see, ergo we're doing something. It's like a lot of airport security. It does nothing to stop terrorists, but it looks good and it impresses people and we're doing something. And I think we're caught up in that. It's also interesting. We've got other things to do today. We could go into 1,000 things on Theresa Tam. But if you look at what Emergency Preparedness Canada said, and what people like Dr. Tam were saying before the pandemic, and then what they did during the pandemic, it's like, hang on, almost 180 degrees out of phase with each other. How did this happen? And again, if you tend to believe that much of what Prime Minister Trudeau and others is doing is more to do with centralization of government, centralization of power, and with social control and social reengineering, then what they're doing actually makes sense. The fact that it's medically unsound advice is not really relevant.
Yeah, I find it's kind of reminiscent of what Churchill did during the Second World War when he told everybody to surrender their pots and pans so they could be melted down for munitions. And of course, that was a totally specious claim that he was making, and that was never the intent. It was to make people feel like they were doing something. And I can't help but think that if I, as I am right now, were alive back then, I'd be like, well, you know, what is the point of this? Now we're still getting bombed and I don't have anything to cook with. So it tends to have sort of the opposite effect. It tends to be adverse to our well-being as opposed to promoting it. And it's Machiavellian, you know. It's just like you say. They seem to be obsessed with the social engineering aspect of it, which in my mind shouldn't be an aspect. But yeah, they seem to be more concerned with optics and control in their careers than they are with the well-being of Canadians. But I digress. I'm going to go on to this next line from the InSum here. So this is an article from Fox News, and they're reporting on CNN's reporting. You know, it is what it is. I think everybody knows where these two networks stand. But the development here is that the CNN paragon of leftist propaganda is actually starting to talk about the Hunter Biden laptop. So the headline is CNN's Brian Stelter says Hunter Biden scandal, not just a right-wing media story, may prevent Biden 2024 run. I'm sorry, I've been drinking a lot of coffee. My mouth is getting dry. So I'm just going to go ahead and play the video here because it's the article is basically a description of the video.
No sound.
Oh, Jesus.
Golly.
It's, here we go. I say again, that should be the default. Box check. Get out of here. Oh.
What about Hunter? Hunter under federal investigation. Charges could be coming at any time. This is not just a right-wing media story. This is a real problem for the Bidens. Could he decide not to run for re-election given his son?
Look, they make decisions as a family, and they will make that decision when it's time. But like you said,
do you think they've talked about it yet?
No. The president's doing his job. He's doing his work. He's not focused on that. It's 19 months. Why would he be doing that?
Okay, so you're saying the press is getting ahead of...
Way ahead. Way ahead.
Pretty sure those guys are a couple. Just saying. Now, there's one other thing that they add in down here. It says, in the lead up to the 2020 election, Hunter Biden's laptop story was falsely declared Russian disinformation by dozens of former intelligence officials. Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms suppressed the story by preventing people from sharing the link to the New York Post article reporting on the subject. So that's the history for that one there. And I want to show a meme. There you go. Somebody sent that one to me. I was like, yeah, that is succinct.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating story, Jeff. Just before the last U.S. federal election, the presidential election, the New York Post broke a fairly substantial story on the Hunter Biden laptop. Everybody knew about it. The videos were out there. Information was out there. Hunter Biden was talking about getting 10% for the big guy. It was very clear it was his father. He was involved in all kinds of corrupt deals in Ukraine, all kinds of corrupt deals in China. But the New York Post finally runs this story and says, look, here it is. Here's the laptop. Here's how it went astray. Here's the information. Here's why it's important. And it got jumped on from high heights by, as they mentioned, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, banned the New York Post story. They Twitter deplatformed the New York Post, which is a substantial media outfit by itself. And
oldest newspaper.
They actually had 52 intelligence officials say, well, we've examined it, and yes, it looks like Russian disinformation, like whatever. No, they couldn't explain how videos of Hunter Biden smoking crack with underage Chinese girls, how the Russians got those videos, but whatever. Now, and I think this is fascinating, is even CNN and even Brian Stelter, or whatever his name is, has actually come out and, well, maybe it's not just a right-wing media story. It's like, no kidding. Thank you for that, CNN. But what it is to me is a signal that the Democratic Party is exploring options on how to put the knife into President Joe Biden. They can't let this guy run again. It works against their interest to even keep this guy in office for the next 2.5 years, 2 years, 4 months, whatever it is. And I think they're beginning to look at ways of sort of sliding Joe Biden off the stage. And one way to do that, of course, would be to go after Hunter Biden first, bury Hunter Biden, and then use that as sort of an entree to pushing harder against President Biden. But it is fascinating to see the mainstream media finally, what are we? We're almost 2 years into this situation, finally admitting that Hunter Biden did have a laptop. He lost it. Actually, he left it at a repair shop. The laptop is packed full of videos, photos, him in China, him in Ukraine, him getting money, him getting people set up so they can see his father, who at the time was vice president. Multi-million dollars being struck, discussions about Joe Biden showering with his own daughter, which are kind of like, what's that even doing in there?
Yeah.
And finally, it's actually possibly starting to come out. Now, of course, we've also just had former President Trump's house being raided. So we'll see where that one goes. But it is fascinating that the mainstream, even CNN, the most lefty of all progressive media, are finally starting to figure out there's something wrong. So that's kind of a little bit of a bit of positive news out there anyway, Jeff.
Yeah, it's a sign, I think, that things are actually turning. And I just wanted to throw in there to clarify, because I know we kind of say a lot sometimes without really saying the bottom line in the military, because we all speak the same language and we know what it all means. But for anybody that maybe is wondering why it is that we're so concerned with Hunter's personal life, it's because this is a vulnerability in terms of national security for the U.S. Hunter is a very good target for things like blackmail, bribery, and we know of all these big transfers that have been done. What is it, $31 million that Biden got from the Chinese? So that's what the operation in the Ukraine was all about, and what Hunter was doing on the board of Burisma there. So it sure looks like we have a compromised president running the biggest military that has ever existed. Most powerful for sure. So that's kind of where we are right now in 2022, and it's all very unprecedented. That seems to be my favorite word these days. But I'll go back to the next item here. And again, I think this is a sign that things are starting to turn.
The digital identity is not just a passport that you will have on your.
So this is from the Netherlands, actually. I should mention that. This is a Dutch lady who's explaining this here. And I just want to say that, the Canada and the Dutch have had a very long and amorous relationship, and I'm very proud of that. So
your iPhone in a digital form. It entails just about everything the government would like to know about you. And yesterday in the Dutch media, we saw a perfect example of what it could entail in the near future. We had the CEO of one of the largest Dutch banks say, why don't we start with a personal carbon credit?
Oh.
A carbon wallet, she called it, actually. Yeah. So right in line with the plans that the World Economic Forum people have for us. And she said it in a way that was particularly funny. She said, well, if everyone gets an individual personal carbon credit, why don't we make it so that rich people who, for example, want to go on holiday a little too often can buy personal carbon credit from other people who, for example, can't afford buying plane tickets or eating meat too often. So we can that way swap it out.
Oh, so if Bill Gates or Leonardo DiCaprio's carbon footprint is getting a bit too big, then some peasant living in his hovel up country somewhere can sell his, and he can't afford to go to Saint-Tropez, but he'll be able to sell his carbon allowance to Leonardo DiCaprio, so Leonardo can park his yacht in Saint-Tropez for a couple of extra days.
Exactly right. That's it. So what will happen is the rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer, and they're saying it openly as if it's not a controversial thing at all. It's neo-feudalism. That's what it is. And they don't mind, it's just, okay. Then they said, well, it's just a thought experiment, because obviously a lot of people were kind of upset about this communist ideal that they just presented to the people on TV as a good idea. So they said, "Oh no, it's a thought experiment." Well, we've heard that before.
Yeah, we've had too many thought, but it was interesting to see. As you were talking, we saw that banker. She was being interviewed on a Dutch radio show, and she got a little too relaxed, and actually, as they say in America, said the quiet part out loud. You're not actually meant to. There she is. She's chatting in the radio studio, and she just gets a little carried away. And we went to her now. Now there's a bank vice president in Canada. I think it was the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, which is one of the biggest banks in Canada, said pretty much the same thing and sold it on. This is going to be so convenient, because all your information will be centrally located, so we can save the planet. We're just going to keep track of how many miles you do in your car, whether you've taken one too many vacations in the Greek islands, if you're eating too many cheeseburgers. It'll all be centrally located, and that will make it all the more convenient for you.
Yeah, and they're being honest, so they're exposing their true agenda, because obviously the best way to get to a modern person's heart is to say that it's convenient for them. So yes, you won't have to carry all your different papers and your passports, but the downside of it is, and I hope that people will start to see this, that the government can shut you down. So you know, if you want to buy a burger, red screen, no Mark, not for you. That flight, not for you. Oh, but you can just buy it if you have enough money, right? So they're being very open and honest to what their goal is here. So we should take their words seriously and say, hell no. And instead, this woman going off on radio and saying exactly what she thinks. Now, we had backlash, right? So people were upset about it, but she's invited on national television tonight. So in an hour, she'll be sitting there talking about this great thought experiment. And then suddenly it's part of the debate. And it's accepted. Whereas I would say we should cancel these communists immediately and say, get the hell out of my private life. I'm not having you track me and decide what I eat and where I go.
So there you have it, Tom. What's the analysis on this one?
Yeah, that one's fun. I mean, the most interesting thing that she raises is they're actually being honest about it now. If you started looking into these kinds of issues 10 years ago and tried to figure out what the World Economic Forum was doing, what the IMF was doing, what was Justin Trudeau actually thinking about when he calls us a post-national state, you would run into obstacles. It would be hard to find information. Now we have senior members of civil institutions, civil society institutions, openly stating what they're actually thinking. And as she points out, she's saying this is essentially what I would call elite capture. The elites are going to restructure the financial world. They're going to restructure the agricultural world. They're going to restructure the world of money and how you own money and how you spend money in order to make it more convenient for them to be able to eat meat, fly around in private jets, go to nice places on vacation, while the rest of us aren't allowed to go or can't afford to go. Or if you decide you actually want to do, as they said, you know, buy a cheeseburger, you're going to have to pay an extra carbon tax on that because you already had a cheeseburger yesterday and you've exceeded your allocation for cheeseburgers. Now, another fascinating thing here, as you've got up on the screen there right now, is MasterCard is already doing this, and they did it in cooperation with the UN. It's just, and they sort of introduced it as, oh, isn't this a cute feature on the MasterCard? You'll be able to track your own carbon footprint, and won't this be fun? And won't it help save the environment and all this sort of stuff? And of course, as anybody should have figured out by now, that once the government decides they're going to put something on your phone or your computer for your convenience, what they really mean is we will collect all your information and then use it and misuse it to control you as part of our social engineering experiment. Now, the fun part of this is when you said this stuff 5 years ago and you talked about UN Agenda 2030 and climate change, whatever, if you talked about it, people said, well, that's a conspiracy theory. You're crazy. Rachel Gilmore of Global News, when I put something up about the Great Reset, she put this thing up and said, well, the Great Reset is a conservative talking point. It's a debunked conspiracy theory, and we shouldn't pay any attention to it. And it's like, well, guess what? Klaus Schwab now has a book out called COVID-19 and the Great Reset. So these folks are not only advocating this and pushing towards it, they're completely open about it. They don't feel they have to hide anymore. One quick last little thought on this issue. The Europeans are looking at fuel, fossil fuel, and of course they want to get rid of fossil fuel because, you know, it's bad and whatever. So they're going to put more taxes on this and more restrictions on that, except fuel used for yachts over a certain length and fuel used in, guess what, private jets will be exempt from the new form of taxation. So if you drive some dingbat small car with a 3-cylinder engine or a 4-cylinder engine and you're trying to be fuel efficient, you're going to wind up paying more tax for your fuel. But if you're a movie star or a politician, you travel around in a private jet, which incidentally is the absolute worst form of transportation in the world, period. Yeah, you'll be tax exempt. So bottom line, when people say the elites want us to, you know, drive around on bicycles while we're eating bugs so they can fly around in their airplanes and eat steak, here we have the CEO of a major bank in the Netherlands exactly advocating this out loud. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at on that one, Jeff. It's quite strange.
Yeah, and I think she said, she called it neo-feudalism. I think it's kind of like a neo-serfdom. You know, you're nobody asked to be born, and now you're sort of born into debt, and you have to pay somebody to live. You know, because you're carbon based. And I got to wonder, you know, where these people get off, frankly, acting like they own the world. But that kind of seems like where we are right now.
Well, in many cases, they do own the world. That's part of the issue. Is many of the elites now have compromised the political system, and people throw words like communism, like she was doing there. People call it fascism, neo-feudalism. Maybe it's a new form of serfdom. I think eventually we'll come up with a new word. Fascism and communism are like so 20th century, and we're kind of in the 21st century. But whatever it is, it's clear that it's a totalitarian system driven from the top down, and the folks at the bottom, that's like the bottom 99%, are expected to have very little to no input on how things actually work. So I'm not quite sure what the word is. Neo-feudalism is kind of fun. Neo-serfdom, serfism, whatever, just being a serf is kind of interesting. Yeah, and you're going to be born, in many cases, into a situation where your parents are in debt, your family's in debt, and you will spend your entire life paying taxes. So the elites can kind of drive around in their nice vehicles and their jets. Now, one other interesting thing happened towards the end of the last century, and we haven't quite sort of digested what this means. Historically, there has been a ruling class that sits on the top: the kings, the princes, the emperors, the presidents, the prime ministers, the heirs, whatever. And then there's the kind of next class down, which is sort of like the aristocracy, the rich, the elites, the factory owners, the powerful, the generals, the presidents of corporations, those kinds of people, the bankers and those things. And then there's everybody else in the bottom, the peasants, the serfs, the holopoly, whatever you want to call them.
Yep.
What happened towards the end of the last century, and it's happening now, is we've seen a reversal in the top two. What happens now is the bankers, the financial elites, are sitting on top of the system. They're telling the politicians what laws to affect, what laws to get rid of, and what laws to enforce. And so now we've got sort of like at the top, you've got bankers. Below that, you've got the political and aristocracy kind of class. And below that, you've got the peasantry. So it's actually, it's a reversal of, I don't know, like 5,000 years of civilization. We've always had that 3 layers of hierarchy. And now the top 2 have inverted to a point where we've got the financial elites running pretty much everything. Unelected, unaccountable, but incredibly powerful and incredibly influential. So when you look at things like the World Economic Forum, at the end of the day, it's all about money and control. When you look at the International Monetary Fund, it's kind of lost its original positive role and become more about controlling certain countries that won't behave correctly. Same goes for the World Bank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was just a fascinating little interview where that woman admits openly that, you know, oh, well, the poor people, you know, they won't be able to travel and they can't afford to eat meat anyway. So let's just let the rich people eat their share. So instead of, you know, eat the rich, it's now kind of in turn of like, you know, dump the poor, kind of a reversal of that thing. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at right now. And it's going to be interesting to watch these forces struggle and see who becomes preeminent in the next little while.
Yeah, I can't help but think that if they can persist in these attitudes, that eat the rich will be coming back pretty soon. But yeah, it's something new, I think. It's this century's crack at authoritarianism. Last century, you know, we had fascism and Nazism and communism. And all of those isms, I think, probably fall under the umbrella of fascism, really. It's, you know, it's all about state control, really. And Giovanni Gentile was the founding philosopher of fascism. He said everything inside the state, nothing outside the state. But with the bankers on top, it's like you say, it's kind of something new, but they're sort of taking out the lessons learned from the last century and improving on things that they did last time around. So we're in uncharted territory at this point. And I don't think anybody's curious to find out what happens next. But here's the next one here. This is Anthony Furey from Post Media here, National Post. And this is pretty mainstream. Like Anthony Furey tends to lean right. He writes for other right-leaning papers and stuff. But he is mainstream. So we have this article here: "The open-minded Canada I immigrated to is no more." Full comment with Anthony Furey. And so this is a quick clip right here. If you guys got that.
Nope, no sound. Yeah, I don't think the sound is coming through, Jeff. I can vaguely hear something in the background,
Okay.
but that's okay. It's not really necessary, I guess. It's a podcast by Anthony Furey.
Yeah.
And he's talking to a woman who's successful, intelligent. She's doing very well here in Canada. And he's asking her about her experience as an immigrant. And it's worth noting that she immigrated to Canada from the former Yugoslavia when the former Yugoslavia decided to blow itself up on the altar of identity politics. And just as we were just mentioning, Yugoslavia kind of blew up when a bunch of unreconstructed fascists decided to go head to head with a bunch of Islamists who were going head to head with a bunch of communists. And of course, the thing turned into a disaster. So this woman comes over here by herself, doesn't bring any family with her, very young, perhaps a little naive, but she really thinks Canada's a great place and this is where I want to grow. And she's gone to school, she's become successful, she has money, and she's kind of saying, look, you know, Canada's a great place, I like it. And then she's kind of like, but, you know, what I'm seeing is Canada is sliding away from what it was when she got here, you know, less than 20 years ago, sort of a thing. And she's arguing that essentially the stuff that kind of blew up the former Yugoslavia is now the stuff that's coming to be here. And she's raising the point that says the virtues of Canada, integration, everybody getting along on the same page, everybody having the same values, those things are falling apart. And now we have, you know, a Canadian immigrant class and Canadians by themselves who are often more divided on what Canada stands for rather than united. And of course, the more divided it becomes, more difficult it becomes. And she's also arguing that if you're an immigrant, it's getting harder and harder to get here and be successful because you wind up being dumped into these sort of identity pools. And the old idea of coming here, getting dumped into the pond and sort of joining everybody else. Yeah, you can wear your hat, you can have your separate restaurant, but we're all going to buy into the Canadian value system. We're all going to buy into Canadian ideals. She says, well, that's under attack and it's starting to fall apart. So I sent out to people in the InSum we put out and said, if you've got 30 minutes in your day, it's a podcast worth listening to, because here is a woman who's been very successful as an immigrant, but she's starting to question whether that success can continue and whether Canada as a country will continue to be successful or whether they should just leave the place. Now, interestingly enough, during the James Top March into Ottawa, I spent a couple of hours marching alongside a guy, won't give his name, I mean, folks might know who he is, but Sikh guy from Montreal, successful family. He himself is successful. Grandparents are successful. You know, it's just been a success story for them. But as I was talking to him, he said a lot of his relatives now are thinking about retiring back to India, or that's sort of like the older folks. And a lot of the folks who are still, let's say, in the formative stages of their life are actually talking about moving to America. And you'd say, well, why? You know, you've been successful here. What is it that's kind of driving you away? And his story was, you know, I won't tell his story for him, but basically the story was the same, that he said the stuff that attracted them to Canada, the fact that you could work hard, be successful, join the team, and, you know, live in relative peace and live in relative safety with a country that functioned relatively well, all of that stuff's going away, and the financial future is going with it. So the opportunities that used to be there are draining away. So if you want to work hard, and if you've got money and you want to make more money and you want to keep working hard, maybe Canada's not the place to do that. And it's kind of like, wow. So that's sort of like two different people telling two different stories, but they're both from successful backgrounds, and I think that's worth listening to. We can talk about this more later. I did a podcast a couple of years ago called "Leaving Canada," and I had just inadvertently kind of made a comment to somebody about, being born in Canada was winning the global lottery. If you were born in Canada or you moved here, you win the global lottery just by fact that you're here. And then if you're actually working or whatever, it's great. But I sort of said, well, if you're living in Canada, do you need a plan B? If something goes wrong in Canada, where do you go next? What's your plan B? And I got this massive response from people in social media. And I discovered that a whole lot of people in Canada are working on plan B now. In other words, everybody thought up to 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, that Canada was the world's final point of refuge. Canada was the big lifeboat. Canada was the place you wanted to be, and everybody's trying to get there. But now we see a continuous stream of folks leaving Canada, and we see money and entrepreneurs leaving Canada in particular over the last couple of years. And this is getting to be a serious problem. The idea of Canada as the lifeboat is going away. The idea of Canada as the final point of refuge is going away. And people are now looking for plan B. And I was surprised by some of the responses I got when I actually polled some people and did a little work here. When I asked people, if you don't want to stay in Canada, where would you think about going? Ironically, nobody said the United States, but several people pointed out individual states: Arizona, Utah, Florida, Texas. So, okay, you kind of, okay, those are, states where things are a little more open, things are a little safer, things are working. So I get that. And then a bunch of people said Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Honduras. And you kind of go like, wow, Costa Rica is kind of nice, but the other countries have some problems. But it's like your money goes so far there, foreigners are considered relatively safe. And a lot of people are starting to think a nice house in Panama, for another place, relatively cheap, it's relatively safe, and maybe it's a better place to retire. Nobody picked the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Spain, or Italy. A bunch of people picked Slovakia, Hungary, and a whole bunch of people picked Poland, which I thought was really interesting. That Western Europe was always kind of seen as the great place to be, tourism, money, culture, arts, all that stuff. And Eastern Europe was always kind of like, well, got a few problems over there. But now Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic are starting to look like they may be the places where there's going to be some stability, some fiscal reality, and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's that one little podcast interviewing that woman I just thought was a bit of good fun, because it points to a much larger problem in Canada, that when we cease to be the destination for everyone who wants to be successful, what we're going to wind up being is the destination for everybody who wants to collect welfare and just dump here. So, we can't survive as a country without entrepreneurism, without people who want to work, because we've got the makings of a great country. We got a whole bunch of room. We got a whole bunch of water. We got wood, coal, iron, steel, rare earth minerals, gold, silver, you name it, we got it. We got a huge market just to our south, which is like almost an automatic market. But we're doing such a terrible job right now running the country, and this focus on progressivism, I don't know if you want to call it fascism, totalitarianism, elitism, whatever label you want to stick on it. But yeah, it's starting to hurt us. And this is something we're going to see over the next couple of years, that the money's just leaving Canada. When that money leaves, everything else goes with it, Jeff.
Yeah, and you know what you say, the way we're running the country, but if you just kind of accept that the game is to ruin us, then it seems like they're doing a pretty good job running the country right into the ground. And I can't help but wonder, because you mentioned the IMF and how their reputation isn't quite what it used to be, but is that the game, I wonder, to bankrupt us so that the IMF will have to come in and bail us out and we get a bunch of austerity measures, and then we're Greece and everybody's in the streets rioting? What do you think?
Yeah, one of the there's not a lot in politics that's known with absolute certainty. But one of the things that is an absolute certainty is if you're a government official, a politician, and you want to move your state towards totalitarianism, towards fascism, towards communism, whatever direction you want to take it, the greatest single obstacle to that is a well-functioning middle class. Because middle class folks aren't really in favor of totalitarianism. They're not in favor of like 100% control of the state. And a lot of the middle class is happy and prosperous because they're entrepreneurs. They own their own businesses. They work for privately owned businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are, let's just say hypothetically, I don't know, Justin Trudeau, for instance, and you hypothetically wanted to create a sort of one-party state in Canada where you would have elite control of the system, yet you've got one real huge obstacle, and that is a well-functioning middle class, which in Canada we have one of the largest, or had, more correctly, one of the largest, most powerful middle classes in the world. Now we see over the last several years in particular, the middle class is being ground under the thumb of debt. They're being ground under mandates, restrictions, freedom of expression is coming under attack, and their prosperity has stalled out for the last couple of decades and is now in fact going rapidly downhill. So your point is sort of correct. If the objective of the government is to support the people and build a happier, more prosperous, more stable country, then it could be argued that Trudeau's doing a pretty bad job. But if you flip that around and say he's looking to control the polity, he's looking to control all of civil society, then yeah, putting the middle class into a position of dependency on the government is a necessary step. So I would say watch this fall. We're going to see more COVID foolishness, vaccines, mandates, lockdowns, whatever. We're going to see more climate stuff. It's like, oh, we have to have, climate controls, more nitrogen management, more carbon management. We need to stop private cars. We need to stop fossil fuels, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to start seeing more sort of economic measures like economic lockdowns. There's a crisis coming. The government needs to save you. And of course, what they will also tell you at the end of the day is, oh, but don't worry, universal basic income is coming. We'll help the citizens. We'll give them money every month so they can get through it all. In other words, you create a dependency on the government so that the middle class, rather than being dependent on its own labor, its own family, its own initiative, its own intelligence, has no choice but to become completely dependent on the government. And as your statement earlier, everything inside the state, nothing outside the state. That's kind of the objective of most totalitarian governments. And at the moment, that seems to be the direction we're going. And of course, this is why we're seeing heads banging in places like here in Canada with the convoy, in Sri Lanka, where they actually drove the government out of the country. And I mean, drove them out, chased the president across a dock onto a warship. They had to save the guy. And we're seeing the Dutch farmers protest, which is a head-on confrontation between the sort of land theft and, so-called nitrogen management policies of Prime Minister Rutte, who is a huge fan of the World Economic Forum, by the way, and the farmers who are saying no. And the Dutch people are looking around going, what's going on here? But yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at, Jeff, is we're going to see a lot of these confrontations play themselves out over the next couple of years. And here in Canada, we're going to be at the leading edge of much of this because Mr. Trudeau and Christy Freeland and a bunch of others in our cabinet are huge fans of the World Economic Forum, and they're going to play that mandate out to the best they can.
Yeah, and I find it interesting because I was just listening to you talk about where people are planning on going. My plan B is Florida, and I even consider that as a plan A. When I was first getting out of the military, when I was first getting medically released, I spent 4 years down there working with NORAD, so I would have a lot of friends in the area, and I get the culture and I kind of identify with it. So that seems like a good place. But I was listening to you rattle off some other places where they name states instead of just saying America or the U.S., and where they name sort of old Eastern Bloc countries. And what seems to be the common theme is that they're all kind of right wing. That's what I think of in those different places, like Florida, Texas. Now, what was the other one there? There was
Montana popped up, and Utah.
Montana. There you go. Yeah. So so those are kind of like known to be rural places, a little bit more right-leaning. And I know in Canada, right-winger is something like pejorative, that you're supposed to spit out your mouth like a curse word or something, but it just means liberal Democrat, right? And we are a liberal democracy. So I think that speaks to the kind of inverted paradigm that we're in at the moment. Yeah, it seems now that the countries in Europe that struggled with communism and fascism, authoritarianism in the 20th century, having been traumatized and learned their hard lessons from that, have become the countries that are now vigilant against that kind of thing. And the Western Europe is having its struggle with authoritarianism. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. Not just that the governments are right wing so much, in the sense that most of those countries or states, individual states, tend to be more small government orientated, i.e.
That's what I would say is right wing.
Yeah, less government equals more freedom, more government equals less freedom. So there's a certain degree of that as well. And then the freedom thing kind of comes into it as well, irrespective of whether the government's large or small, is, you know, how easy is it to start a business? Do you have to fill out a couple of forms and send the government $100? Or is this like a 8-week-long process that requires 4 lawyers and 3 accountants? And increasingly, states like Florida are trying to make it easier for businesses to set up by streamlining the process. Whereas other states like New York are just making it, you know, now, oh, in order to set up a business, you need to do a carbon credit analysis of your impact on the environment while you're running the business. So, and you look at that and go, how the hell do I do that? Well, you'll have to hire some accountants and some advisors and all that sort of stuff. And it's just becoming an incredible burden on even small businesses to try and meet all these standards. So here, for instance, in Canada, if you want to bid on a government contract now, the government wants a supply of carrots to feed the military. They want a supply of fertilizer for a farm or something that the government runs. Now you have to do a feminist perspective and a diversity and inclusion thing. And you have to explain how the way you run your contract is going to help the equity, diversity, feminist, something, something, something. And at the end of the day, you look at it and you go, I'm a machinist. I make parts for ships. You know, how am I supposed to understand the government's policy? So a lot of times, you know, what it's doing is it's just putting more and more and more regulatory burdens on people. And they're going, enough. I'm tired. I can't do this. I just want to work and run a business. I don't want to be a social engineer. So countries like Poland and Hungary are certainly sort of leading that. States like Florida and Texas are trying to find their way through the problem. They seem to be doing okay. So that's kind of a good thing. Now, interesting enough, you mentioned folks from, like, say, former communist countries or former dictatorships. During the convoy, we had huge support from the Polish community, and it was exactly that line. We know what communism looks like. We know what oppression looks like, and this is what it looks like. Big support from Romania, which perhaps was an even worse mess than Poland was during the Soviet era. Big turnout from the Sikh community. A lot of truck drivers are Sikhs. A lot of hardworking entrepreneurial kind of folks are Sikhs. And they say the same thing. They say, we understand what oppression looks like. We understand what stupidity looks like. That's why we left over there to come here. So just for instance, at Herb's Plaza, about 70 kilometers east of Ottawa here, it was a big gathering point for the convoys as they were coming into Ottawa. What pops up in the middle of this? Like, this is rural farmland in Ontario, hard over by the Quebec border. Then a whole bunch of Sikhs pop up and they're handing out food, handing out sandwiches, whatever. And it's kind of like, what the heck are these guys doing here? But they believe, this particular groups of Sikhs believe that, you know, oppression is bad, what the government is doing wrong. But they also believed if you're successful in your community and you have money and you've done okay because of your work, then you should share that with other people who need the help. And that sort of theme of a number of religious groups, whether they were Mennonites, Hutterites, some of the Catholic nuns, all came out and were all sort of advocating that same sort of thing, that they understand what oppression is because they have a history of suffering it and they see it now. And that's why they're supporting the convoy and other people. So yeah, I find it fascinating that some of the folks who suffered the worst such as like Mennonites. Why are they here in Canada? Because of oppression in Europe. So
Mhm.
these guys know instinctively what bad stuff is. Same with the Sikhs. They've suffered pretty bad in some areas. They know what this stuff looks like. So to me, it's also from an intelligence perspective, it's an indicator and warning. When these folks come up out of the ground and just sort of say, hey, there's a problem here, you should listen to them because they understand oppression maybe better than a lot of Canadians do, Jeff.
Yeah, and it really was, I don't know, it was probably the greatest thing I'd ever seen on Canadian soil was that trucker convoy. It was really something to see the Mennonites out protesting. So, you know, if the Mennonites and the Quakers are upset that, you know, there's something awry here in Canada. But I want to go to a comment here. Oh, I think it ran away from me. But, oh, here we go. Yeah, this guy's kind of calling me out a little bit, and that's okay, guys. I don't mind. And he says, you all say we're winning, and now you say you have a backup plan. Yeah, you should always have a backup plan. And I made that backup plan before I even released from the military. And like I said, it was kind of a primary plan there for a little while. But you know why I changed my mind is I kind of said, well, you know, if there's any place that I could call my home after being in the military for the last 20 years, it is Cape Breton Island, and it still is the home of my heart. And why should those commie bastards get it when I bled for this land and served it overseas? So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to fight like hell for the home of my heart. And I do think that we're seeing some positive signs that things are turning, but I don't want to give people false hope that we're winning yet either. I think we need to kind of watch and shoot, as we say in the military, and see what's coming here in the fall. But Tom, did you want to throw in on that comment at all? Or?
Yeah, I'm surprised. I don't know if we've actually said we're winning. We have said there's some optimism, there's some good things happening. But this is like the thin end of the wedge. We're just at the start of the real war here. If you want to compare this to World War II, kind of maybe it's 1941. We're still kind of on the receiving end of most of the bad stuff, but we are pushing back. And that's a good thing. Victory by no means is assured. And yeah, as for having a backup plan, I guess maybe that's a function of being like I'm former aircrew from the world of heavy helicopters at sea. And we have a plan, and then we have a backup plan, and then we have a backup to the backup plan, and then we have a life raft. And we kind of go down through that. I don't know what folks know about the world of aviation, but the world of heavy helicopters is probably one of the most dangerous types of aviation, far more dangerous than say civil aviation or airliners, stuff like that. And then operating heavy helicopters off small ships is really interesting. And then doing that in the North Atlantic, which is the most hostile environment in the world for ships or aircraft, kind of teaches you that a backup plan is always a good thing. And then same thing when I was deployed in Croatia and Bosnia, a couple of times we found ourselves driving down the road at 2 o'clock in the morning because plan A failed, plan B failed, and now we're on plan C. And, you know, eating Coke and Mars bars at 3 in the morning and trying to look out for landmines is always interesting. But yeah, I would always tell people plan A, that's good. You should have a plan B, and having a thought about a plan C, not bad either.
Actually, I was just going to throw in here because now that you mentioned military experience, of course, I come from a comms background or a computer geek background, and I was a project manager for the last 10 years of my career and deployed a couple of times. And we work off a model called the PACE plan, where you have your primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. Like these are no-fail objectives, obviously. I mean, if you're in the middle of Africa or the Middle East, and you know your link to the world is through a SATCOM back to Canada, and that sucker goes down. Well, what then, right? You're stranded in the dark. So yeah, you shouldn't just have a primary and an alternate plan. You should have a contingency plan and an emergency plan. That's the model that I recommend anyway. But I'll go on to our next story here. Sorry, what did I cut you off there? You can go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I just thought it was funny. In the wonderful world of Sea King helicopters, we had UHF radios, VHF radios, HF radios, and we had, I'm not making this up, we had a handheld light so we could do Morris with light.
That is exactly your PACE plan.
Yeah, and we had a system rigged with the ships that we could use the landing lights as a signal as to what we were trying to do next if we lost everything else. So yeah, anybody that's ever been in the military or done complex operations knows that a communications failure is always going to occur. It just always happens. A bridge too far, that disaster in the Netherlands was a comms failure.
Right.
So yeah, plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. And then if worse comes to worst, get a piece of paper, get a pen, write it, give it to a runner and tell him to go. So yeah, always have a backup plan, Jeff.
Yeah, always be thinking about the way out. Like what happens when this fails? What's the next move? Just always be doing that. Okay, so we have the next one here. This, as comical as it may sound, FDA clears the way for single monkeypox vaccine doses to be split into 5. I don't think you know English very well. So I'll just read a couple of paragraphs. Today, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued an emergency use authorization for the JYNNEOS vaccine to allow healthcare providers to use the vaccine by intradermal injection administered between layers of skin for individuals 18 years of age or older who are determined to be at risk for monkeypox infection. This will increase the total number of doses available to use by up to 5-fold. The EUA also allows for the use of the vaccine in individuals younger than 18 years of age determined to be at risk of monkeypox infection. In these individuals, JYNNEOS is administered by subcutaneous injection. And it says, quote, in recent weeks, the monkeypox virus has continued to spread at a rate that has made it clear our current vaccine supply will not meet the current demand. The FDA Commissioner Rob M. Califf, MD, the FDA quickly explored other scientifically appropriate options to facilitate access to the vaccine for all impacted individuals. By increasing the number of available doses, more individuals who want to be vaccinated against the monkeypox will now have the opportunity to do so. So I don't know if there's a better way to say that. Is it Genios vaccine? Maybe I'll try that. Genios. It's all caps anyway. But anyway, Tom, what do we have to say in the intelligence world about all this?
Yeah, it's always fun to compare stories across sort of boundaries, if you will. So here we have, the monkeypox vaccine's been around for a while. This is nothing new. Monkeypox has been known about for years. It was just never spreading. So a variety of countries held monkeypox vaccine sort of somewhere in the back room in a fridge. They had a bunch of it there and said, if we ever need it, yeah, there it is. Great. So all of a sudden we think we need it. Okay, so lucky we've got some. Now all of a sudden we're being told that this is a international emergency. The World Health Organization is saying this is a crisis, and California is calling it a crisis and whatever. And what is it, like 5 people have died or 8 people have died? I think more people have been eaten by alligators in the same period of time as have died from monkeypox. But nonetheless, we're being told this thing's a huge crisis. And so we need more vaccines than we really kind of thought we had. So now, this is the question. If we are being told, let's say, for the last 20 years, just to randomly pick a number, that this much monkeypox vaccine is what's required for an effective dose, you say, okay, well, that's been the standard thing. Now, all of a sudden, they're saying, well, actually, we need more of it. So we're going to cut that to 20% of the original dose. And I'm kind of like, okay, that sounds pretty strange, but hold that thought for a second. Let's go over and look at the COVID-19 vaccine, which went from sort of nowhere to massive global distribution in under a year. And if you dive into the details of that, did they do testing on people to determine dosage, and does it matter? So if a 5'2" woman walks in who's some kind of, track athlete, marathon runner, and she weighs 90 pounds, what kind of dosage should she get as compared to Buddy sitting over there who's an Oreo cookie eating champion who weighs 350 pounds? Should they get the same dosage? And the answer seems to be yeah. There is no difference between what they give a 90-pound person who's in phenomenally good condition and some land whale that weighs 400 pounds. So you kind of go, does it really matter? Is there a potency thing here? And the answer seems to be, yeah, it does seem to matter with the COVID-19 vaccine. but yet the thing was rushed into production so quickly, they just overlooked all that sort of stuff. And now we're starting to see a lot of negative side effects, and people are trying to determine, is it hitting sort of like small people more so than it's hitting people who are seriously overweight? And now, of course, we've got the monkeypox thing. They've determined that, oh yeah, it doesn't matter how much we give them, we'll just cut it by 20% and it'll work. So in other words, what we're seeing is the bureaucracy or the technocracy is making decisions on distribution based on availability and their desire to get it out there, rather than a medical assessment that says you need so many cc's of this per 100 kilograms of body weight or whatever. So there's just kind of like two examples off the top, and you say, should we really trust the FDA, the CDC, Public Health Agency of Canada and all that, when decisions are being made on efficacy for the government and getting it out there the way they want and getting it out faster than, really is sensible, rather than a bunch of scientists sitting around saying, yeah, at the end of the day, you need this much monkeypox vaccine. Now, if they actually said, you know what, we're going to do a different kind of thing. We're going to weigh people when they come in and say, okay, you weigh 300 pounds, you get the full dose, but you weigh 90 pounds, so we're going to give you a third of the dose. Maybe then you'd have a little more faith in the system. But again, to me, it's just one more indicator and warning of a deeply, deeply flawed approach to public medicine. And the approach is it suits the government's plan for efficacious policy as opposed to actually making people more healthy.
Yeah, it seems to me that, it's being run by bureaucrats and by business executives. And so it's all about the numbers. It doesn't even really seem to have a whole lot to do with safety or human health. It's about, we got this many doses out there in this much time, and we got this many people vaccinated, and they're really looking for those stats, kind of the bragging rights, like it's all a competition and it's all about their careers. What do you think?
Well, just by example, to move into a completely different realm, let's look at the Phoenix pay system in Canada. It's a perfect example of what you just said. So the government of Canada decides that the individual pay systems that all the different departments are using, military, health, transport, PCO, PMO, Shared Services Canada, each one is a different pay system. Sometimes they line up, sometimes they don't. So some genius in the government said, let's go to one big pay system. Other companies do it, like IBM does it, General Motors does it. How hard can this be? Toyota does it. Let's go with the one pay system that will serve all of the government. So you kind of listen to that and you say, well, okay, maybe that makes sense. Maybe that's not a bad idea. So away they go. They get this Phoenix system from IBM. They start modifying it, adapting it, and changing it. IBM backs out of the process and says they want nothing to do with it, which was an interesting warning that something's wrong. And then they roll it out to one department, and the thing crashes and burns, and it fails, and people aren't getting paid. They're losing pension money. They get promoted, but they don't get the increase in wages, and they don't get paid for like 6 months sometime. And then they roll it out to another department, and another department, and another department. And the thing keeps failing. It cost them multi-billion dollars to repair all this damage. They're spending another couple of $1 billion to buy another system. But guess what? The bureaucrats who rolled out the system got bonuses for delivery. And you look at this and say, the thing crashed and burned on the first day. They knew it. They kept rolling it out to multiple departments where it kept crashing and burning. But they got performance bonuses. Why? Because they rolled it out on time, Jeff. That's what they got the bonus for. Yeah. So when you look at it, civil servants get rewarded for reaching benchmarks. So if the benchmark that's given to a particular department is to say we want 80% of Canadians vaccinated, that's what they'll get done. Whether it works or not, whether it kills people or not, whether it helps people or not, is not important. The bureaucracy is completely driven by process. We have a process. We get 80% of people vaccinated. We win. Where's my bonus? Now, compare that to something like a Ford factory where they build F-150 trucks. Imagine pushing, 500 trucks a day out the door at the factory, going to your boss and say, yep, we reached 500 trucks today. Give me my bonus. And the boss says, there's your bonus. Great job, Bill. Away you go. And then the owners of the trucks come back and say, yeah, I kind of went to start the truck and there's no engine in it. And they go, well, sir, deliver it on time. You wanted the truck, we delivered it on time, so we gave our factory manager the bonus. Now, in reality, Ford would fire that guy so fast your head would spin, and the whole chain of command would be fired for producing a product that doesn't work. That's the real world of business, capitalism, commerce, etc. But in the government world, they'd have got the bonuses because they delivered 500 trucks on time. So here again, when you hear the government say we need 80% of Canadians vaccinated and we've got 48% triple vaccinated and all that kind of stuff, remember that what's driving them is getting their bonuses for reaching their targets. What's not actually driving is whether you're healthy or not, or whether the system works or not, because it's just not important to them. And that's the staggering of reality of where the bureaucracy's at.
Yeah, I pay attention to that kind of stuff, just how singularly focused they are on cases, for example. And there's really no consideration, like the way they even write their terms of reference and stuff like that. I'm not sure if terms of reference is what I'm looking for here, but they'll talk about it in terms of case counts, and it's always about reducing COVID-19 specifically. It's not really about the broader health outcomes or anything like that. Like, you know, you could kill the patient and then there's one less case of COVID-19, basically. You know, it's not all that bad, but it does seem to be the case that there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of wisdom being put into these plans, and it's all about kind of getting numbers on a spreadsheet. But I digress, and I'll go on to our next topic here. And so this is True North reporting here. And they say CBC blasted for depicting white voters and conservative voters as hateful. So this was something that the CBC did last year around election time there. And they ran a story from a kind of hysterical leftist woman living in Toronto, I believe it was. And she was writing about how she was working at a polling station and she had to sit there all day watching people who didn't think like her come in and vote. And she was, like I say, hysterical. So this is some good news, again, that things are kind of starting to turn. That's why I put this at the end, because it says, CBC's Ombudsman Jack Nagler criticized the state broadcaster for publishing commentary by an Elections Canada worker which painted elderly white voters and conservative voters as hateful and racist. According to Blacklock's reporter, Nagler ordered the CBC to review its editorial practices as a result of the incident. Quote, "It was not okay to publish a headline that declared political parties and, by their inference, their voters as hating people," said Nagler. Nagler found that the commentary was in breach of the CBC's journalistic standards and practices by being, quote, "neither fair nor precise enough to be considered accurate." Quote, "Declaring a politician to be hateful should be based in their policies and their actions, not just the color of their lawn signs," Nagler argued. The decision was regarding an op-ed published in the fall, written by Zena Raymond, an Elections Canada worker for the 2021 federal election. In the opinion piece, Raymond argued that conservative voters, quote, "hate people like me." Quote, "On election day, I greeted people who voted for parties that hate people like me. Elections provide numerical evidence of the rise of right-wing politics, and that should worry us all," wrote Raymond. Quote, "During the first hour of my shift, an elderly white woman came in with a walker. After she left, I couldn't help but wonder whether, despite our pleasant interaction, she was one of the people who hate people like me. It was jarring to realize that many of the people who had seemingly been nice to me throughout the day had chosen to vote for the Conservative Party," she continued. Quote, "This piece was not up to our usual standards," said CBC Managing Director Andrea Lau in response to the complaints. Quote, "We took the corrective action right away. The piece was eventually republished in November with alterations. In a different decision," okay, I'm going to stop there. I think you guys get the idea, but yeah, so I think that's actually a positive sign, because I remember when that first came out, they were unrepentant, unapologetic, and there were plenty of complaints. And these things take time, is kind of the point that I want to emphasize here, because I hear a lot of folks in the freedom movement right now. There's there's a lot of pressure mounting, I think, a lot of frustrations. People are looking around and saying, we're not there yet. And they kind of jump to conclusions like nothing's happening. But as we can see, like these processes, while they do take time, they do bear fruit. And I would encourage everybody to send their complaints to the CBC and everybody to file their human rights complaints for whatever discrimination you face for being genetically intact, because the Canadian Human Rights Act just had, I think, genetic status added to it, to its prohibited grounds for discrimination. So that could be an argument to pursue. But anyway, it does seem to be the case that there is some blowback even coming from within the establishment. This is an ombudsman, so he's part of the he's kind of part of the state, and the state apparatchik more broadly seems to be corrupted at this point. But we do see signs of light breaking through. What do you think, team? Or what do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I've been involved in sort of research into extremism in Canada very heavily as an independent operator since about 2013, 2014. And of course, I was involved in a number of court cases on this kind of material. And then I was involved in it, with the military, RCMP, whatever. So I've been kind of very sensitive to this kind of issue, particularly since 2014. And just over the last, I would say, year and a half, maybe something like that, I've been surprised to see a couple of CBC stories that, weirdly enough, sounded very much like journalism. And I kind of laughed when I read them and thought, gee, this seems like a balanced, intelligent report by somebody who went out and did some work to get a story. And you go, wow, how'd that happen? I'll bet that poor sod will get fired. And then I've seen the same thing. Globe and Mail, you can see them running hot and cold. On one day, they run some stuff which is just progressive nonsense. Yeah. Global News, same thing. They run some of the worst crap out there that's imaginable. But every now and again, you see this journalism breaking through. And my suspicions are there are certain people in the establishment media who are looking around them, realizing that Trudeau's not going to be prime minister forever. The gravy train that they're on right now, which is free money, is going to dry up sooner or later, whether Trudeau goes away, the Conservatives get elected, or if the country just goes broke and they decide to cancel the money. And I also feel I've seen there is a number of success stories out there, like Blacklock's reporters here in Ottawa actually run an investigative journalist system that looks at government, and people actually pay to have access to their website, and they're making a go of it rather well. So I do think a lot of the establishment journalists are looking around wondering what happens when the free money runs out, and maybe we better get back into the business of investigatory journalism and reporting rather than agitprop for the media. And then there's a few other folks out there, like I said, like Blacklock's, for instance, are actually making money doing real journalism, calling the government to account. And so, again, somebody said, you guys, you say you're winning. I don't know if they're winning or not, but I do see a number of positive signs out there that suggest the media kind of gets it, that if they just sit there and pump out woke crap, folks aren't reading it. So get woke, go broke. That's a lesson I think they're taking on board. Netflix is getting it. Amazon Prime Video is getting it. Disney Corporation doesn't seem to be getting it yet, although their stock got hammered repeatedly. Hollywood is gradually starting to get it. Hollywood just spent, apparently, the numbers disputed. It was $70 million or $80 million US on the new Batgirl film. And this thing is done. They're done all the shooting. They've been all around the world doing all their scenes and that. They're bringing it back. They're putting it all together. The editors are there, the sound people, they're working on it. And they canceled it. They just said, that's it. It's done. We're not even going to send it to like Netflix or something. It's just going to can the whole thing and throw it away. And people were saying, well, how can you spend $90 million on a project and then just can it? And apparently it was so hopelessly woke. It was so full of woke nonsense. When they showed scenes to potential viewing audiences, people just basically threw up and said, I'm not going to watch this. This is garbage. So again, Hollywood, that absolute bastion of liberal, progressive political correctness, wokeness, just took a $90 million hit because they realized that their woke crap won't sell anymore. So I think across certain members of what one might loosely call the chattering classes, or what usually be called the intelligentsia or whatever, they're starting to get the message: get woke, go broke. You better get going and start producing something that actually works instead. So hopefully the survival of journalism, the survival of the media may actually be the driving force that gets them back to doing real honest to God investigative journalism, for which I think people would pay.
Yeah, I think they would too, and I think it should go back to that. I absolutely can't stand the fact that that commie rag, Maclean's Magazine, that spends so much time beating up on the military, actually gets my money, despite the fact that I don't pay them a subscription. And what do they have, like 15 people working there now? So, no, I mean, really, I think that's how many staff they have working at Maclean's. It's like 15 people. So it's just ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous. It's criminal. And what I think will happen, what'll help a lot with this, and this is another sign that things are turning, is mainstream politicians like Pierre Poilievre are talking about defunding the CBC. That's not my endorsement of the paper tiger, but they are going this route. There's an appetite for it. And a professional politician like Pierre Poilievre would definitely understand an opportunity when he sees one. So he's promising to defund the CBC. And kind of once that happens, the rest of the dominoes are going to fall, because the situation we have right now in Canada is that the CBC employs like at least half of the journalists in Canada because of that $1.5 billion that they take right out of our pockets every year. And so anybody who's even kind of working with another outlet that's not on the take already, they're always kind of looking at the CBC and wondering, okay, well, because that's where they're going to end up. Like if they're with an independent outlet that's just kind of on the brink and might not be making enough money, they're looking at the CBC and saying, okay, well, this is the ideological line that I have to toe in order to get access to those sweet tax dollars if this independent thing doesn't work out. So once that pig trough is gone, it's going to change the whole dynamic in the Canadian media, and it's going to reintroduce that element of accountability that we once had with our own money. But I want to go back just 1 second and cover one thing that they said, because I think it's very telling here. It's from the original article, and this is what this polling station worker was saying. She's saying, "It was jarring to realize that many of the people who have seemingly been nice to me throughout the day had chosen to vote for the Conservative Party." So what's wrong with that, right? What's wrong with voting Conservative? The thing is that I wanted to point out here is that she has conflated conservatism and racism, and that's what we see sort of throughout the discourse in Canada right now. Is they've conflated being a right winger with being something scary, something radical, something racist. And of course, racist is the thing that they always throw out there. It's basically just the worst word that they can think of to call anybody, and it varies on a given day. But that's really the tactic that it is. It's very schoolyard, and you can see that the mentality is pretty black and white as well. There's not a whole lot of room for nuance there and that kind of thinking, where if you happen to lean right of center, then you're motivated by racism. But the irony here is that a liberal Democrat is right leaning, and we live in a liberal democracy. So I just want to point that out again, that this association between the right wing and racism is really demonstrative of just how inverted a paradigm we're in right now. And I think it has everything to do with a kind of anti-Western narrative that they're pushing more broadly. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I think I kind of had to laugh when the ombudsman or whoever it was, the CBC spokesman, well, this isn't up to our usual standard. I'm not quite sure how that happened. And I was kind of like, yeah, actually, it kind of goes very much down the path of what you guys have been doing for the last few years. The difference is this time it was so blatant and so just unsupported and so fake that a bunch of Canadians actually got outraged with the thing and complained. And the CBC, I think, finally figured out they better say something. And again, it's just that one more little indicator that the narrative they've been running, that everything is racist, everything is horrible, everything is a victim. We need to destroy every institution in Canada so we can replace it with our sort of, you know, progressive elitist kind of, well, I mean, you know, whatever we're calling it, communist, fascist, whatever sort of ideology. I think even CBC got the message that says, yeah, we better back away from this one and push that woman overboard. I'd like to ask her, how do you know they voted Conservative? Did you ask them? In which case, okay, you shouldn't have been asking those questions as an employee of the voting, the electoral system, Elections Canada. You should not be asking people that question at a polling booth. Or alternatively, where you're kind of like peeking over the booth or something like that. I don't know. How do you know they voted Conservative? Or are you a racist lady and you just assume because they're white they're going to vote Conservative? Was that your form of analysis? Was, oh, they're white, so they must be voting Conservative, which of course is, you know, the absolute fundamental racist assessment. So anyway, yeah, I think CBC, to their credit, actually did the right thing here and is trying to put a bit of distance between themselves and this, well, mess.
Yeah, no kidding. And it really is based on a stereotype. Like they lay it out for us in the 2 paragraphs that I have highlighted here. She says, on election day, I greeted people, blah, blah, blah. During the first hour of my shift, an elderly white woman came in with a walker. After she left, I couldn't help but wonder whether, despite our pleasant interaction, she was one of the people who hate people like me. So it's based on the stereotype that old white people are backward. And they're very upfront about applying this stereotype in the the national media, our state-funded public broadcaster. So that's the current state of affairs in Canada. It's a pretty sad one. But I just want to turn it over to you one more time, Tom, before we go for the final word. Over to you.
Well, let's go just back to that one person's comment that said, you guys say you're winning and then we need a plan B. Yeah, I'm not sure we're winning. I am sure we're in the fight, and I think that's a good thing. I've done the same thing. I've thought about, you know, should I go to Panama? Should I go to Costa Rica? I know a lot of people are choosing to stay in Canada, but radically changing their lifestyle, i.e. moving to small rural communities, doing the farm thing, doing a more self-reliant kind of thing. My sort of feeling at the moment is I'm here. I'm not leaving yet. I still think that Canada is salvageable. I think we're on the right path in the sense that a bunch of different groups are coming above the ground, like you and I, like Veterans for Freedom. We're standing up and telling the government, no, this isn't going to happen. So yeah, I'm a little more positive than I was 6 months or a year ago. But having said that, Plan B is always a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Plan B, C, and E. Like I said, the PACE plan: primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. And I'll give one more comment here before we go, because I saw this one came up while we were talking. And I think this is in reference to some of the things that I'm saying about how it's going to take time. And somebody is saying people got to go to jail, folks. And I'm going to say that, you know what, I happen to think so too, but it's not going to happen overnight, and it's got to be done the right way. We got to stick to our foundational principles and do it legally. So anyway, I just want to make sure that there's no perception there that we're downplaying the gravity of the situation here by saying that it's a war and no war is ever won in a single battle. We got to pick our battles strategically, and we got to play it straight down the line, good and smart.
Yeah, I do think at the end of the day, a year from now, 2 years from now, we are going to see people being sued or people being criminally investigated for some of the stunts they pulled during the pandemic, whether it was flat out fraud, selling the government garbage products and making millions of dollars for it, like we're seeing a number of cases come up, or people who willfully advocated, oh, yes, you should get your 6-month child vaccinated when they knew full well the friggin' thing was dangerous. So my suspicions are a year, 2 years down the road from now, maybe sooner than that, we're going to see people, I think, in handcuffs who were advocating this stuff. But who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, that's probably my hope, I would say. I think if there's justice to be had out of this situation, that we'll see some of that. But only time will tell. And like we say, there is room for optimism, and all the signs are starting to go in the other direction. So we'll wait and see what the fall brings, but for now, just watch and shoot, troops. So I'll say goodbye to you, Tom, and enjoy the rest of your day, brother.
Roger out.